What's up, everybody? In this video, I'm going to show you how to consume a .NET Core Web API using Angular 14. Okay, I'm going to start out in SQL Server Management Studio here just to show you our data. So what I had is a sample database here, and I created this table, and this is going to be the script that I'm going to paste in my description so that you can just paste this into your database and create this table. And it just creates some columns and just a few records. We have 10 records here. And there's our schema. So we have contact ID, which is a primary key, and also our identity specification. So it's going to auto-generate our IDs for us. And if we just do a select star, we've got 10 records currently in our database table. Now, as far as the API is concerned, I have a number of videos on creating .NET Core Web APIs. You can just go to this one right here, how to create a .NET Core Web API in 10 minutes. It's 10 minutes and 7 seconds long, and that will basically give you everything we need for our API, with the exception of cores, which I'm going to show you right now. So I have a sample API open here, and what we need to do in order for our Angular app to consume this API is we need to add cross-origin resource sharing. So, inside my program.cs file, somewhere in here, where we have builder.services, we have our DB context. I can put it there, I can put it below the DB context, but just right up around in this area, I want to put my builder.services.add cores. And then I also, where we create our app variable, right after that, I want to add app.useCores, and then we're going to set up our cores policy, which is to allow any header, any method, and any origin. And that's going to allow our Angular app to communicate with this and bring back data and post data and do HTTP requests and so on. So let's go ahead and fire this up and take a look at our Swagger UI page. So here's our Swagger UI, and we have all of our CRUD methods here. And I'm just going to go ahead, click try it out, execute, and that brings back all of my contacts from the database we just looked at. Other things that you can get from here is this request URL right here. So this has our localhost, our port, and that it's an API controller and the controller name. So we are going to be needing this a little later on when we set up our Angular service. So now let's go ahead and move over to the Angular side. So what I'm going to be using here is Visual Studio Code. So I'll just right click and go to Visual Studio, or you can go to Visual Studio Code or a new window, come in here. And what I want to do is open folder. And for this, it's up to you how you want your folder structure to be. I'm just going to use this folder that I created. So just for web, you don't have to put them like in the same folder that your API is or anything like that. I'm just going to go ahead and select this folder. Like I said, it's completely up to you where you want to put yours. And so I have this folder open already. This is where our API is going to live. You can see there's nothing in it. Let me just show you how we got to the terminal. So you can go to terminal, new terminal, and we have our little trash can over here to get rid of those terminals. Another option, you can go to view terminal. Okay, so now the first thing that we need to do in order to create our web API. So let me just show you the version that we're using as well. So the Angular CLI, so NG version. And that's going to tell us what version of Angular 14.0.2 and Node 16.15.1. So If you want to follow along with the latest version of Angular, you just want to make sure that you're set up to use that. Okay, so let me go ahead and delete that terminal, and we'll start again. Now, what I want to do, the first thing we need to do is create a new Angular app. So the command for that is ng. Most things Angular, are going to be ng. So ng keyword new, and then just give it a name, and let's call it sample app, and hit enter. Now we're going to be prompted. For Angular routing, just say yes, and also what kind of style sheet we want to use. So I would just stick with CSS. And this takes a little bit, so we'll just let that spin up. So you can see that it's creating our app as it goes. We have our sample app. It's created our source folder with our app and our app module, which is the root module. We'll get into that. This node modules folder is going to contain all of the packages that are available to us. It's an enormous folder. So we'll just let that continue spinning and be back as soon as it's done. Okay, so now we have our fully functional Angular app. So if we were to fire this up right now, we would get a page that's going to contain all of this, which is like the default. It starts out with a bunch of CSS, and it's going to have all of these links, on tutorials and learning Angular and all those kinds of things. So next thing I want to do is close out that terminal. I want to go here. We have some uh, buttons up here. So this collapse folders, whenever you get into, especially the node modules folder, this really comes in handy. So you can just kind of collapse everything and start over. So, or we're going to be installing all of our components and services and all those kinds of things is under source app. And that's where our app module lives. So, and that's going to be the root module. And we will get into that in a second. What I want to do here is another way to open up a terminal is I want to right click on my app folder and say open in integrated terminal. And now what I'm going to do is just fire up this application for the first time. So ng space s for serve, and you don't have to type out serve. You can just do s. And I do hyphen the letter O, lowercase o, and hit enter. And this takes a bit the first time. So let's let that do its thing, and I'll be right back. Okay, so this is the page that it created. If we go back to our app, it says compiled successfully. So let's take a look at this. And this is what I just described, it just has some links in here, some helpful things about learning Angular and things like that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close out of that for now and close out of this. And the next thing we need to do is install some more NPM packages. So one command I use a lot is CLS, which just clears out our terminal. And so we need to also do this under source/app. Now, our node modules contains the packages that we need. Well, we need to add a few things. We need Bootstrap and Font Awesome, NGX Toaster, and jQuery. So you'll notice in here they're all listed alphabetically. We don't have Bootstrap in here, so we're going to need to install that using Node Package Manager. So you can do this one at a time, or you can do a bunch of them at once. And I'm just going to go ahead and paste those in. So here's our command, npm for Node Package Manager, I for install, and the name of the package. So we have Bootstrap, Font Awesome, Toaster, and jQuery. And then I'm just going to hit enter. And now it's going to go ahead and add all of those packages to our node modules folder. Okay, now that that's done, and let's go. So I have my node modules open, and we're still not showing Bootstrap. So all you have to do is click on the refresh button here. And there you see is our Bootstrap, and you'll find Font Awesome and all the other ones in here as well. It has a distribution folder. It has, JS and SCSS. Okay, so go ahead and close out of that. And this is where I say this collapse all is going to be really good, because that's node modules is a very large folder. So let's just go back to our source app. The next thing we need to do is some configuration. So we're going to need to edit our styles and sources. So for that, we're going to go into angular.json and our styles and scripts. So you see we have a styles array and a scripts array here. I'm going to go ahead and replace that as follows. And to format in here in Visual Studio Code, you just do Alt Shift the letter F. And so we already had our default style sheet, which you see right here. And it just added some style sheets for Bootstrap, Toaster, and Font Awesome. And it also added the scripts for jQuery and Bootstrap. So, because we're going to need that, because we're going to be working with Bootstrap and jQuery. So now we also need to do some configuration in our tsconfig.json file. So let's come down to tsconfig.json and open that up. And this is something you don't, you can either wait until you need to do it, which I guarantee you will when you start creating models. But for the sake of simplicity, we're just going to configure some of these properties right now. So what I'm going to do is go to our compiler options, and right below strict is true. And I'm just going to add 4 lines here. So let's take a look at them. I'm just going to add strict property initialization, resolve JSON module, strict null checks, and no implicit any. And this is simply that when we, for the sake of simplicity for this tutorial, we're not worried about, having to explicitly declare, to assign values when we create every object that we create and things like that. I mean, there's some default properties that we can change, and that's what we're doing here. So just to make our lives a little easier, in this tutorial. So I'm just going to go ahead and save that. And now we can close out of both of those. Now we need to go back to our app folder and go to our app module.ts. So this is the root module for our Angular application. So this is where all of our modules and anything that's application wide is going to be stored in here. We're going to be creating components in just a few minutes, and all of our components are going to show up in here as well. And I will explain that there's an option to create modules and put your components in a separate module and then bring that module into here. So anyway, let's go ahead, and we're going to need to import some modules in here. So let me go ahead, and I'm going to just copy them and paste them in here, and then we're going to explain. So what I added was browser animations, and we're probably not going to use this, but I'm so used to using it because, so I use CSS, like I use animation sometimes, and so I just, by habit, I bring that in. HTTP client, absolutely essential. Is how we're going to be able to communicate with our web API, and forms module. That is so that we're going to be able to work with forms, and toaster module is for our NGX toaster that we installed so that we can work with the toaster service. Now that we have these, whenever you bring a module in, you also need to add it to your imports array. So I'm just going to do it one by one. So comma, and you can just go ahead and copy and paste them down here. And the toaster module, I'm going to add some properties to it. So it's going to look like this. And so what I've added is progress animation. So we're going to have a progress bar that's going to be moving upwards across the screen while this toaster is displaying, and a timeout of 1 second. So that's all we need to do for now in our app module. We'll be getting back into this file when we create our components, because I want to show you how they get added to this module. But for now, we can get out of there. And now we're ready to create our first component. So once again, I'm going to do CLS to clear this terminal out. I do want to reiterate, make sure that you are in your app folder here in the terminal, source app. Okay, so the command for generating a component. So we're going to create two components. So we're going to create one for our list of contacts, and we're going to create one for our contact details. So that when we click on an element from our list, it's going to essentially be an HTML table. So when we click on a contact from our list, it's going to display the details for that contact. So the command here is ng, G for generate, C for component, and then just give it a name. So contacts. We can actually, since we're only dealing with one entity, you don't really need to do this, but you could, basically create, an entity that would be holding the two entities, or the entity, I keep saying entities, the components that we're going to create. So we could create a contacts component here. So yeah, let's just go ahead and do that. We'll create a contacts component. And what this is going to do is it's going to create a contacts folder here, and it's going to add 4 files to it. So let that do its thing. And you'll see that it created component.html, component.spec.ts, which is a test file, component.ts, and component.css. So, and there's our folder. Right here is our contacts folder. So now we can use this, and that could be our contacts list. So, and then what we could do is have separate folders. We can create another component, and it will create another folder for contact. Or what we could do is actually navigate into this folder and go in, open in integrated terminal. And then we can just say nggc and contact summary. So we can say contact summary, and that would give us a list of contacts. Summary isn't really very descriptive. Let's call it contact list. And now this is going to create a component within our contacts folder called contact list. So there, and it's got the same 4 files. And then also within this folder, we can create a component for a singular contact. So we can just say nggc contact and hit enter. And now it's going to create a folder in here just for our singular contact. Okay, so now we have, I don't want to say parent component, but it's our contacts component is going to hold each of these components inside of it. So instead of using, an alternative to this is we could have just, deleted our app component.html and put those side by side in here. But with this, now we can actually show you how to use routing and router links and all of that stuff. So I think this is better. We're not going to create a full-blown Bootstrap header or anything in this tutorial, but we will go through the router links, functionality. So anyway, so now that we have our components, what we need to do is we need to go into our app routing module. So I'm going to find that file right here. So go into our app routing module, and this is where we set up our routes. So I go to this routes array here up top, and with a left curly brace, I'm going to say path, and then I give it a string of the name of the path. So we're going to be navigating to contacts, the contacts component. And then we're going to say comma, and then just tell it which component we want to load when we go to that route, and that would be contacts component. Okay, so that's the only route that we're going to need. And this is, think of this, that this is going to end up being a hyperlink that we're going to click on. It's going to be technically, it's called a router link. Just going to format that. So that's the only route we need to worry about. And when we open up this route, we're going to have both our contact and our contact list component displayed on our contacts page. So that's the next thing we're going to do is let's go. And before we do that, let me go to our contacts component.ts. So you can see up here we have selector. The selector, this is what's going to go inside of our tag, and I'll show you that in a second. And our template URL, that's our HTML, which is what we're going to go to next. And the CSS we're not going to use because we're going to use our main styles.css here. So, we're not, let me go into, the only thing we're going to do here is go into our contacts component.html. So this is our template. And what that's going to display, if we were to fire this up right now, it's just going to display a P tag that says contacts works. Similarly, if you go to any of the other HTMLs, contact list works and, contact works and so on. So let me go back in to, oh, by the way, if you want to keep a window open when you go in, instead of single clicking, just double click it. So that way when you open something else up, it doesn't disappear. When it's in italics like this, that means that you haven't edited it yet or anything, or you didn't double click on it. So anyway, so in here, what I want to do is just add our tags. So, we talked about tag. If I go to my contact component, or let me start here since this one's going to go on the list, as this one's going to be first. So our selector is app-contact list. So I simply need to go, and it's going to be a tag. So left angle and go app contact list, and then just hit my right angle bracket. It's going to give me my closing tag. And it's going to be the same for our contact. So go into contact component, and that's going to be app contact. So I can just copy that. And now I can just do that in my right, and it creates my closing tag. So that gives us our tags. Those are our templates that are going to be displayed on the contacts HTML template. Okay, so I can tell you right now that that's not going to look very good. So we're not going to do too much with CSS in this tutorial, but let's at least do a little something. So I'm going to come down to my styles. And the first thing I'm going to do, it says you can add global styles to this file, is on my body element, I'm going to just add some padding. Actually, padding top. And I think I'll just make it 60, 70 px. And that's just going to give me some padding. Also, since we have Bootstrap installed, we're going to be able to use Bootstrap here. So I'm just going to go up to the top and create a div container div element, and a shortcut for that, you can just say dot container and then hit the tab, and that will give you a div, and put the container class in, and then I can say dot row tab, dot column tab, and then I'm just going to go ahead, copy this so that we have two columns. And now I'm going to place my list in the first column and my details in the second column. And once again, it's Alt Shift F to format, save that. And that gives me my container, or my contacts class. Like I said, it's not really a parent class or parent template. It's just going to house our other two templates right now. And you'll see that when we get into writing the HTML for those. Okay, so one other thing we need to do is go into our app component.html. And I am going to just do a control A and delete all of this boilerplate code here. We do need to add our something called a router outlet. So what the router outlet is just an Angular directive that's going to route us to the appropriate component based on what's called a router link, and we'll show you that in a little bit. That it's essentially a hyperlink that when we click on it, it's going to take us to the appropriate component based on what we defined in our app routing module. So, I mean, like I said, we're going to have a link that's going to say contacts, and when we click on that, the router outlet is going to route us to this component. So that's all that does, but we do need to put that in there. Other things you could put in here would be like if you added a header, you would put that at the top of this, and then you would put, like, if you had a footer, you would have a footer in here too. So these are things that will be used by all the pages or all the components of your application. Okay, so now we're ready to create our contact model. So for this, like I said, I'm going to go ahead and clear screen down here. So inside of our contacts folder, there's a lot of ways you can do this. You can just generate a class and put it right inside the folder. But chances are, in a real world application, you're going to have more than just one model. So you may want to create a folder. We can use the make directory mkdir command and just give it a name. And we could name it something like models. And that will create a models folder. And then just go ahead and right click on that, open an integrated terminal. And so this is where I'm going to store my contact model. Now the command for that is just mg space g for generate, and then type in the word not model, type in the word class, and then give it a name. So I'm going to call this contact. So it's going to create our contact model class. And it also created a test class for us. So there's our class contact. Now I just pasted in our properties. So these properties are essentially the same thing that we have in our web API. So if we go to our contact class here, we've got contact ID, first, last name, email address, and phone. And it's also the same as our database, and the casing is the same too. That is something that stumps a lot of developers at first when they start working with Angular. Sometimes things get changed around where you've got camel casing, something got converted to camel case or whatever, instead of, like, this is all in Pascal case, and you're wondering why you're getting null values and things like that. So, but we've got everything matching up, all good to go here. So that's going to be our model. The next thing we need to do is create our service. So now I've got 3 terminals open. I could certainly go back into another terminal. If you wanted to go back a folder, you can just go cd ... and that will take me back to my contacts folder. I'm going to do clear screen. And so we're going to kind of do the same thing. We're creating a service. You may have more than one service too. So what I want to do is create a folder for that. So I'm going to go make directory. And I'm just going to call it services. And it's going to live inside of our contacts folder. So there's our services folder. Now right click on that, open an integrated terminal. And this is where we're going to add our contact service. So the command for that is ng, g for generate, s for service, and then just give it a name. So we're going to call this a contact service. Hit enter, and it's going to create our contact service inside of our services folder along with the test file. So there's our contact service. There's our contact service.spec.ts, which is our test file. So the contact service here, what we're going to use this for, this is what we're going to use to make all of our HTTP requests to our web API. So the first thing I'm going to need here, and I'm going to use the keyword private HTTP. You can name it whatever you want. That's just the variable name. And I'm going to use, let's go to our app module. So we have our HTTP client module. So this is why we needed to add that. So HTTP client. So just hit enter, and that's going to bring in our HTTP client import. And this is going to allow us to use all of its HTTP methods. Okay, so I'm going to need a couple of variables in here, 3 of them in fact, and one, I'm going to need a contact, which is going to be of type contact, the model we just created, and I'm just going to set that equal to new contact. And I'm going to need one to hold our list of contacts, so it's going to be a contact array, and I'm going to set that equal to empty array. And now I need one for our API URL. So let's go and find that. We did go over that with the Swagger page. Let's see if I still have that open here. I want to show you another way you can find out what your port is and all that stuff. So if we go into our API and we go to properties, launch settings.json, we're using HTTPS here. So here's our application URL. So it's going to be port 716. And for any controller that we're going to be using, we're going to use this convention here. So API/controller name. So, and now if we go, let me go back into my launch settings. So 7016, oops, almost wiped that out there. So, and another place that we can find that is if we go to our Swagger UI, and that contains our full request URL right here. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy that, come back to our Angular app, and I'm just going to paste that in here. And put a new space, new line in there for us, which we did not want. So now we've got all the variables that we need. We have our URL, we have our contact, and now it's time to create our CRUD methods. So the first one is going to be get contact. So now we're going to get all of our contacts. It's going to call, let me pull up the controller here. So it's going to call this method right here, this IEnumerable of contact. And let's, so we have no parameters. So this is our function. And what I need to do is just say return this.http.get and then pass in the URL. So this.api URL.subscribe and then local variable C. And what I want to do is just simply set my contacts array to the result of our API call. So I can just say this contacts equals C as contact array. So, I mean, anything that goes inside this subscribe method here is going to happen once this API call is done. Okay, so we're basically setting up, this is getting our contacts list, and we're going to use this in multiple places here. So that's going to be our get method. And we don't actually need, we don't really need a get method that's going to correspond to this singular API call. I mean, I can see you may want to add one just to test this out, but I mean, we can test this with Swagger. We know this API works. We already tested it with Swagger. We don't need it, and the reason for that is because we're going to have this list to work from. So there's no need to make another API call to get that. And what we're in fact going to do is we're going to have this list. It's going to be a list of contacts displayed in a table, and when we click on it, it's going to actually pull up the contact from the list itself. So the only thing we need to do is add our post, put, and delete methods here. So I'm going to say post contact. And for this, we do need to pass in a contact parameter. So it's going to be of type contact. And we're just going to say return this dot http dot. Now we're going to call the post method. And we need to pass our URL. So this dot API URL as well as our contact. Now we need one for our put contact. So once again, I'm just going to pass in a contact, and we're going to say return this .htp .put, pass in the URL, and then we actually need to add our contact ID to the URL. So we're going to say something like forward slash and plus contact dot contact ID, comma, and pass the contact as well. And if you take a look at our API method for our put, you can see that it is expecting an ID as well as a contact. Okay, so next we need to add our delete method. So delete contact. And for this, we just need to pass in a number. So we're going to pass in our contact ID. And for this, we're going to call our HTTP delete. Oh, I need my this qualifier, this dot HTTP dot delete. And just pass in our URL plus our ID. And once again, let's take a look at our controller. It is expecting an ID, so it's going to expect API contact and an ID. One other thing I want to add to our service is something to reset our contact. So this is after we do our updates, or updates are, our commands are, put, post, and delete. So anytime we change something, we want to reset our form so that it doesn't contain, information from the previous object that we worked with. So we'll say reset contact, no parameters, and I'm just going to paste this in. So we're just going to set default values for our contact object. So we set our contact ID to null and everything else to an empty string. Now, that's going to be our service. We have that set up. I need to save my contact. Okay. We're now ready to start setting up our components. But one more thing I want to do before we get to that is to go into appcomponent.html. So where we have our router outlet, so this is what I was talking about our router links. I've gone ahead and added a router link to get to our contacts component so that when we click on it, it's going to open that up. And what that's going to look like is if we go to our sample app. So let me just go back to our home. So our home page now has nothing on it except this link, which is going to appear on every page. So when I click on that, it's going to go to our contacts component, and these are our two components that are hosted inside of that. Okay, so I'll give you a second to take a look at that code. I'm going to paste, or I'm going to put all this code up on my GitHub, so I'll put a link to that in the description as well. Okay, so now before we completely set up our components, I just want to show you how the API works and how we can check it, using the debugger, in Chrome DevTools and all of that stuff. So um, I can get out of there. And so the first thing I need to do is I'm going to go to my contact list component. And in this method here, where it says ng on init, this is what's called a lifecycle hook. This is what's going to happen every time we first open up this template, this component. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I want to call my get contacts right here. And just to show you how it works and, kind of what it looks like in DevTools and all of that. But in order for us to use our contact service, I need to take our contact service and actually inject it into my component. So for that, I'm going to use the public keyword, give it a name, we'll call it contact service, and it's going to be of contact service, hit enter, and it's going to import our contact service. Now I'll be able to use this contact service in my contact list component. So what I can do here is just say contact, copy that. So contact service dot get contacts, and we need this qualifier. So this dot contact service dot get contacts. Now I'm going to put the cursor over that, hit F12, and that's going to take me to the method. And what I'm going to do in here is throw a debugger in here. So debugger, semicolon, and now do a save all, Control K and S, and I will not get back to my page in time for this. So just hit F12 to go into DevTools. And I'm not sure what this two lowercase thing is. I'm just going to refresh here. And so let's see what this error is here. So we have two lowercase. So let me take a look at this. And the problem that I found here is for my API URL, I need to make that a type string and set that equal to my URL. So now, and this is a good example of why we need to learn to use the debugger in DevTools. So let's go back in. I'm going to go to F12, and so I'm going to refresh. And I put a debugger before this, and that's a good way to find out. So what was happening is my URL was coming up undefined, and that's why we were getting that error. So now it's going to be just fine. I'm going to go through that, and this dot contacts. Okay, so now we have another issue. So we are going to our API. So here's what the issue is with this. Our API is not running. So what I'm going to do is go to my API, hit Control F5. And now that our API is up and running, I can go to F12 again. And I'm going to hit refresh. We're going to hit our debugger, and there you see there's our contacts. So we have 10 contacts. So, and this is going to be available for all of our CRUD operations. So go ahead. So that's a good example of, when you put a debugger in your code, it's a very good way to find out what's going wrong. I mean, at first we encountered two errors, and it's just simply two things that I forgot to do. I just neglected to make my URL of type string, and also your API needs to be running in order for this thing to work with it. Okay, we're ready to actually start setting up our component.ts file. So I'm going to start with our contact list component.ts. And we're going to keep this right here because that's what we're going to want to do every time this component gets generated. So we're definitely going to want to keep that. We're going to want to call our contacts in the ng-on-init lifecycle hook. A couple other things we're going to want to do here is we're going to set up a table, so it's going to list the contacts that we just saw in the debugger. And we want to be able to click on those and pull up the contact details, which is going to be in our contact component. So we need a way to load contact. So I'm going to create a method called load contact, and that's going to take a contact. So type contact, and that's going to bring in our import for contact. And so essentially what we need to do is we're going to set the contact that we have on our service. So we have one here as well. So we need to use that, and we're going to make a copy of this and set that equal to our contact service contact. So that's going to look something like this: dot contact service dot contact equals. Now the way we copy in Angular is object dot assign, and we have curly braces, and we can just put our contact in here. And so what this is going to do is, like, we have our list of contacts, and we click on one, and it's going to hit this method. We're going to have to add this method to our click event handler, and it's going to call this method, and that's just going to load our contact into our other component. And the other thing we want to be able to do from our list is to delete a contact. So I'm going to add a method for delete contact. For this, we're just going to pass in the contact ID. So ID. Typically, when you're deleting something, you want to alert the user. Hey, are you sure? To delete this. Oh, I spelled delete this contact. Okay, so you want to give them a chance to back out, and so we'll add a confirm dialog here. And so if they say yes, then we can just say this dot contact service dot delete contact, which is expecting an ID, which is of type number. So we can just pass our number, and then we're going to go ahead and subscribe to that. And I'm going to say in our subscribe, we're going to want to display a toaster notification. So in order to access that, we're going to have to bring in our toaster service. So I can say something like private toaster service. So that's going to add our import toaster service from ngx toaster. So I can say this dot toaster service dot warning, and it's going to say something like deleted successfully. We can say deleted successfully, and just give it a title. So the first thing is going to be our message, and the title bar is going to say delete. Next, we want to call our get contacts method on our service. So this .contact service .get contacts. And finally, this .contact service .reset contact. So that's going to be it for our contacts.ts, contacts.component.ts file. Okay, so now in our, let's see, contact list. I mean, we're talking contact list here. So in our contact list.component.html file, so we're going to replace that code with, we're going to create a table. So we want to create a table. Well, actually, we can do the same thing with the dots here. So table and add our classes. So dot table. So that's going to add class table. Dot table ordered. Dot table striped. Dot table hover. Table condensed. And hit tab. So that adds all of our classes here. Create a t-head object or t-head. And essentially, we're just going to create a row and put our headings in there. We're not going to do any sorting or paging in this tutorial. So we can just create a row and then put our th elements in there. And we'll go ahead and add all of our columns. I think I'm going to concatenate first and last name into one column here. So we can just say contact ID. Actually, you know what? Let me just, I'm going to cut that and just go ahead and start over again. So th, and what I want to do is just create, so that's going to be ID, name, email, phone, and delete. Okay, and we'll do Alt Shift F, do some formatting, and then I can just add in my ID, name, capitalize that, name, and email, phone, and delete. So Alt Shift F to format. So we have our headings. Now let's go to our T-body elements. So T-body, and once again, we're going to have a TR. Now, this is where we're actually going to get our contacts. So that the way we're going to do that is by using the ng4 directive. So star ng4 equals, and then you're going to say let and contact. That's going to be our local variable here. So contact of, okay, so what we need to do is we have our contacts stored here. Let me get rid of this debugger while I'm here. So we have our contacts on our contact service. So this is going to be contact service.contacts. So let me go back, and we're going to say contact service.contacts. Okay, so that's going to get all of our contacts and create a new row for each one. And inside each row, we're going to have table cells, so our TD elements. So we're going to have one for ID, name, and I'm going to put first and last name in this element here, and email, phone, and then finally one for our delete button. So we're going to use Angular interpolation here to display our values. So the way we do that, it's just a form of model binding. We're just going to have double curly braces, and then inside I'm going to say contact ID. Oops. So that's going to be my contact ID. And down here we have contact first name, And you can do this. I'll put a space in, another set, and contact dot last name. So we don't need separate cells for first and last name. We can put them both in the same. Next, we have phone, email, and delete. So contact dot phone. Well, I guess phone comes after email, so go ahead and swap those. And we have one for contact dot email address. Let me just double check that that's what we named it. Yes, we did. So we're using our contact model here. I'm just going to delete that. Okay. And then for our delete button, we're going to use font awesome, and we can use our dot shortcut here again, I.fa.fa dash crash. And we can also call the text danger class, so that's going to paint it red. And this is simply going to put a little font awesome trash can next to each row, at the end of each row, that we're going to use when we want. And when we click on that, that's how we're going to delete our contact. Okay, and so that's going to lead us back to our contact list component. So we have this load contact method. So we want to call this whenever we click on any of our table cells other than delete, and we want to call delete when we click on our font awesome icon. So let me come back in here, and the way we do that, we're just going to call that method on our TD element on the click event handler. So in parentheses, I'm just going to say click and then equals, and it gives you the quotation marks there. And I'm just going to call load contact, and then I'm just going to pass my contact into that in parentheses. So I'm going to go ahead and replace all of these TD elements for that, because we basically, this would be the same thing as like if you had an edit button or something. I mean, just, we're not going to put it on the last element, because for this one, we're actually going to call our delete contact. So delete, contact method right here, and we're going to pass in the ID. So we're going to pass in contact.contact ID. Okay, so now we're going to be ready to fire this up, and we should see our list of contacts displayed in this table. I'm just looking at this right now, and our shortcut seems to have put a dash between two of these classes. So we don't want fa dash fa trash. We want fa space fa trash. And let me just do a control S, and I'm going to go back to our sample app. And we can hit refresh here. So there's our list of contacts. It's not very pretty. So what we can do is we can modify the column widths here using Bootstrap, but we haven't worked with our details component yet. But so now what we're going to be able to do is click on this, and I can show you that by putting a debugger in there. So what I'm going to do is hit F12, and let's go ahead and test this with a debugger. So for let me go to my contact list component. So right here in load contact, I'm just going to go ahead and put a debugger in there. And we'll come back in here. And now I'm just going to click on any one of them. So you can see it's hitting that. It's passing this contact right into our method. And when we get done with setting up our other component, it's going to load that over here. And the same thing with delete. So if we were to, I don't really want to delete anything right now, but we can put a debugger in here, and then it would hit our method over here as well. Okay. So what I'm going to do right now, just to make it a little bit prettier, is to go into our contacts component.html. And so we have our column for our contact list. I'm just going to go ahead and make that an MD8, and I'm going to make the other one an MD4. So go ahead and Control S to save that. And let's pull our thing back up again and hit F12. And I think that looks a lot better. Another thing we can do, we are using container here. There's also something for container fluid, which is going to make our viewport wider on this screen. And certainly there are lots of things that we're not going to get into that you can do with CSS to customize this. But, for the purpose of this tutorial, it's pretty much just to show you how this all works. And, the most important thing really is the services and getting this to work with the .NET Core API. And now we can move on to our contact component.ts. So once again, we're going to need to inject our services into our constructor. So why don't we do that first? And for that, we can simply come back over to our contact list component. And essentially, we can just copy that constructor and replace this constructor with that one. We do need to bring in the imports, so control dot, so add contact service, and control dot, add import from ngx toaster. That brings in our toaster service. Now, typically the first thing I'm going to want to do is make sure I have a clean form to work with. So I'm going to have like a reset method. I'm going to call it something like reset contact form. We are going to be work with ng forms here. So, well, we'll bring that in a second. So what I'm going to say is form and nullable. So, and it's going to be of type ng form. So I'm going to have to hit enter here, and that's going to bring in this import, this ng form import. And then we simply just check if form is not equal to null, then we can just call its built-in reset method. And then we also want to call our contact service reset contact method here. And then as this form is initialized, or as this component is initialized, I just want to call this reset contact form. So this reset contact form. Okay, so all of the actions that we perform on this component are going to be command options. So, I mean, in other words, when we go to our sample API, they're going to be issuing commands such as delete, post, and put. So we're either going to be updating, inserting or deleting something. All of our gets are handled on our contact list component. So, what we're going to need to do is we're going to have a button, we're going to have a form, which is going to have editable fields, text boxes, if you want to call them that. So input type equals text. And we're going to have the ability to submit the form and clear out the form and so on. So let's go ahead. We're going to need a method here for submit. So I'm just going to call it submit. say submit contact form. Okay, and I'm just going to pass in a form, and it's also going to be of ng form. Okay, so we have a couple of things, that are very similar on our API, and those are the post and put. They're similar, but they're not exactly the same. So what I need to do is determine, is this a new contact am I adding? In that case, I want to call the post method, or is this an existing contact that I'm modifying? In which case, I want to call the put method, make a put request. So the way I would do it is I'm going to say if form.value dot contact ID is null. So if we don't already have an ID, and the way you can think about this too is if we go back to our Swagger UI. So when you go to your post and you look at this request body, you see that contact ID is equal to 0 because we're adding one. We don't have an ID yet because we're adding. The ID gets auto generated when you insert it into the database. So you can think of it that way. So this is going to be a post request. So what I want to do is value dot contact ID and set it equal to 0. And then I want to call my post method on my service. So this dot contact service dot post contact, and it's expecting a contact. But what that's going to be is form.value, because what we're actually submitting from this form is going to be a contact. So form.value, and then I'm going to subscribe to that and simply say see. And similarly to what we did with our contact list, we're going to create a toaster notification. So this dot toaster service dot, this time it's success, and contact added successfully. Okay, and then you can just put a method or a title here. Let's call it contact. And we also want to call our get contacts. So this contact service get contacts, because we want to get our updated list of contacts. We just added one to it. And then we finally want to reset the form because we want to be able to use the form again, and we want to go and add another one. And we don't want to have the same data that we just typed into that form. So we can just say this dot reset form and pass in our form to that method. Okay, so that's going to handle our post request. And if we do have a contact ID, we're going to be dealing with a put request. So, essentially, it's going to be the same thing, because if we look at our methods, I'm just going to navigate to post and then go to put. They're both expecting a contact. So they're very similar. It's just that when we go to the API, we have to add the contact ID. So let me go back in here and let me go back to my contact component. So essentially, I'm going to be able to just copy this and change post to put. So this, okay, I'm missing a T. So put contact, and then instead of success, and then this is totally arbitrary. You can put anything you want in here. You can put warning in here if you want it to show red, or whatever. I'm sure if warning is red or orange, I don't remember, but we do know that success is usually green and info is usually blue. So we're just going to change added to updated. And if you want to make it more descriptive, you can say add contact and update contact. Those are just our titles. But then we want to do the same thing. We've updated our contact. Now we want to go back and get our updated list of contacts so that our update shows up on our list. And then we want to reset our form. And that's pretty much all we need to do for our contact component.ts. Now for our contact component.html. So I have our markup. There's quite a bit here. So we'll go through some of it and we'll start at the top. So we are creating a form element. And what this, hashtag form thing is, it's just creating like a local variable type thing. We have our submit event handler, which is going to call our method that we defined on our contact component.ts. So our contact form. I set autocomplete off. That's totally optional. Something with like Chrome, which will automatically type things for you. You may not want that. And basically, we've got a form that we can edit here. So one thing I want to do is add some some styling for our error messages. So we'll get to that. So we have our rows where we're going to be, we have a hidden input for contact ID. We're going to need that on our service. And then we have some inputs for first and last name. We have our local variables. We have this ng model. That's our two-way model binding. Let's see. And for each one, I've made them required. So that's totally optional if you want to require, and we'll go over that when we run this, that somebody actually enter something in that field. And if they don't, it's going to show this error message in red. It's going to say that it's required, and I put that on each of the elements. We go through, we have email and phone and all of that stuff. And then at the bottom, we just have our submit and reset buttons. If you want to improve the styling, I'm not sure, I think this is probably Bootstrap 5 that we're working with here. Even in 4, I think this had already changed. But there used to be a btn-block class that we could call to make our buttons stretch the full width of our column, which certainly makes it look a lot better. But now the class is called W100. So I put that on each of our buttons. And so with all of that, let's go back and take a look at our sample app. And one thing I think I did was I also added placeholders. So let me go ahead and find that. So I've required placeholder, and this is just going to be name. So, and first name actually. So let me save that. Come back into our sample app. And so we have our list. And once again, let's just go to our default page, okay, where we have nothing. So we click our link that takes us to our contacts, which holds both of our contacts components. And now we can go and edit a contact. So that just brings up whoever we're choosing to edit here. So I go to this last one here. And, well, suppose I don't do anything. It's saying, oh, this is required. And you notice my submit button is not going to be available unless I have a valid form. So I need to go back in here, and now it's available because we have text in here. So I'm just going to add a middle initial and submit. and it's going to give us our update toaster. And there's Malcolm B. Daniel here. And if we go and look in our database, um, let's go and find him. So Malcolm B for the first name. So our update works. Now, if I do a reset form, um, I can go ahead and add a new one. So, I'm just going to go ahead and add my name and go ahead and submit. And that adds us to our list down here. You saw the toaster notification there. And if we check our database, now you find me down there. Um, and, so this is how our get method would work. I mean, when we click on an item from our list, our object.assign is simply making a copy of that and displaying it over here. So that's our get. That's why we didn't need one. We didn't need to call the get on the API. We don't actually need to make an API call for that. So one last thing we want to test is the delete button. So let me try that. Are you sure you want to delete this contact? Okay, contact deleted successfully. I see that there's a required thing going on here. Um, so let me just hit reset. I looked and I didn't find anything wrong. Um, Not sure what that was. We could have just inadvertently did something. But you can see that if we go and add a new contact, the form does reset the way it's supposed to. If we edit the contact, put in my middle initial, and the form resets the way it's supposed to. And then if I delete my contact, nothing should be happening with that form on delete. So, in conclusion, you would want to obviously go in and style this up with CSS. And, I'm sure I'm going to do another video on that. But for the sake of just getting an API up and running, having an Angular app that works, with your API, we've got that. And, if you were to move forward with this, like take your API, your sample API, and suppose we had more tables in our database. Suppose we had customers and employees and products and suppliers and all kinds of things like that. And our entities grew in here and you wanted to create components on the Angular side for all of these things, then obviously this link up here would grow. You would have a link for home, which you would add a home component and put stuff there. And, you would add a bunch of other router links for all of your other components. So like that, but this is a very simple app. If you want to see something with actual CSS, if I take a look at my Angular, so this is my Azure demo. Um, this is an Angular site that I created. It's exactly what we're doing. It's a little bit more involved. But you can see it has some CSS, a lot of CSS going on, and this is just Angular 12. I wrote this in with .NET Core 5 on the back end, so a .NET Core API, and this is my home page. So this would be my home component, and all of these things on our header up here. So this would correspond to routes. So sales tracker is correct. I just noticed. That should probably, yeah, customers, yeah, because order history is dealing with customers and customer orders. So yeah, that's correct. I was just looking at my title there. Thought I might have caught something. It has some e-commerce functionality, and you know, this is not actually taking any real payment information. It doesn't have a payment gateway or anything, but it simulates what a real e-commerce application would be like, where you would enter your credit card and it validates, all of that stuff. This is a Visa card, and, and so on and so forth. Um, So, you would do a submit and then it would give you an order confirmation page. Ideally, I would add some you know, generation, generate some email confirmations as well, by adding like an SMTP service or something. We also have quite a few, I use Sync Fusion Angular charts in here, and there's sales data. So, this is all my own CSS, and I'm working with Sync Fusion. This is actual data, and some really cool charts and things like that. And also on the homepage here, I have lots of articles on. If you want to go ahead and check this out, go ahead. I've got instructions. Well, these are actually links to what's up here. But down here, I've got articles. All the read mores are articles. This would be how to create, a .NET Core API. And I was working in 2019 and .NET Core 5, really not that long ago, actually. Today is June 20th, 2022. That's today's date. And it goes through all of how this how you set it all up and the instructions, and you can copy this. And it also goes into some of the design patterns and JSON web tokens and open API, that kind of stuff. The Angular, some Azure DevOps, and interview questions and coding challenges. So if you get a chance, go ahead and check out my website, or my Azure site, I should say. And that concludes this tutorial. And if you like this video, like I said, I will go ahead. I'll post this link in the description as well as the scripts. And I'll post all the code for our app on my GitHub. And by the way, I might as well just fire that up real quick. My GitHub I'll put this link for my GitHub up there too. That's for this particular one, but I have a bunch of repositories, and I'll put that and make that available. And anyway, if you like this video, go ahead and smash that like button and subscribe, and I will see you next time.